Hey, so today I'm going to be making the standard bread that I make once or twice a week. It's just a straight up sourdough loaf. Sometimes I do sandwich style bread, but usually I just do a more rustic, kind of free shape loaf. I like them better. I mean, it does get you, a round loaf, which gets you bigger slices, which isn't always a good thing. But on the other hand, maybe it is. I did want to show you, yesterday, it was gorgeous. Made it up to 60 degrees and sunny. Day before that, 70 degrees and sunny. Today, I woke up to this. Beautiful, beautiful snow. In the middle of April. I'm thrilled. No, I'm not. No, I'm not actually thrilled. But at least it means hopefully summer won't come too early, which means around here, hopefully fire season won't come too early. Fingers crossed. So first thing we're going to do, going to set up just the very base of things on this kind of bread. It doesn't take many ingredients at all. This is, it's in a lot of titles and you hear about it all the time. It's just flour, water, your sourdough starter, and salt. Yeah, that's everything that's in here. But when you build it originally, you don't want your salt in there. You don't put your salt in because it's not great for your yeast. You want to give your yeast a little time to get into its environment, get settled, kind of stretch its legs a little. They don't have legs, that'd be creepy. And so you mix everything except the salt all together, let it rest for half an hour. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to mix the flour, sourdough starter. Oh, I should introduce. Isn't it pretty? That is what is left of Morton. My rye sourdough starter, I decided I didn't like him near as much as Jane, which is my normal starter. I set Jane up at the start of the pandemic, so she just passed her 3rd birthday. She's getting big, or at least getting old. They only get big if you let them get big. But I thought I'd try a rye sourdough starter. I didn't like it as well. It's a lot denser, and I found it a lot harder to work with, especially when I was trying to measure out certain amounts. And I couldn't judge how it was feeling near as well. With Jane, I can kind of tell how she's feeling. Usually, after I feed her, she will mostly triple her size. Morton, he would double, but I couldn't get the hang of his timing and how he acted. So I've heard a lot of great things about rye sourdough starters. Yeah, it wasn't for me. I'm sticking with my standard either AP or bread flour. Jane doesn't seem to care. I've tried both with her. Try one, try the other one. Doesn't really seem to make a difference with her. She's really, really easy and nice to work with. Just a good, normal sourdough starter. But so I'm going to use what's left over of Morton and then some mix-ins of discard from when I fed Jane, which is why it's not as dark as normal rye flour sourdough starters are usually, at least the ones that I made. And I'm going to see how it's acting. This is technically only an extra day old, so it shouldn't be too dead yet. If you're using a straight up discard, you probably want to put in some yeast because it's not going to be as lively as you probably want it to be. On the other hand, you could just feed it, say the night before you bake, and odds are it's going to be up and happy in the morning. Sourdough starters are pretty darn forgiving. So I'm going to go ahead and get this set up, and then I'll show it to you when it's ready for its half an hour rest.
Later.
Hey, so great. I got my dough mixed up. Like I said, this is just the flour, yeast, in this case sourdough starter, and water. We don't add the salt yet, it needs to rest. But here it is. It looks pretty rough, and you can see it's pretty loose and sticky. That's normal, that's fine. You want that. You'll notice over here, this is a little cup of water. Just if you mix with one hand and leave your other hand clean, then you can dip your clean hand in the water to help wipe all the gunk off of your other hand. It really helps. You also probably saw the salt sitting there. It's just waiting. It's going to wait for half an hour and while we cover this. And to cover my bowl, I use my handy dandy shower cap. They're cheap, they're easy, they're reusable, and I don't have to fight with cling stuff that always wants to stick to itself, not to what I put it on. So, Oh, I should tell you, the recipe that I am using this from is hardly a recipe. It's out of James Morton's Super Sourdough. It's awesome. This is actually so far my favorite sourdough bread recipe, but it has no name. It has no name. In the book, it's just how to make bread. There's a concise and a detailed version, which are both awesome. By the way, this is a fantastic book. But that right now has just been my go-to sourdough bread recipe. It's out of James Morton's book. I found it while I was on vacation over Christmas, and I'm working my way through it. I haven't got actually much far past this recipe because I like it so much that I just keep making it. But we're going to put our bread to rest half an hour, just relax, let the sourdough starter do its thing, kind of get itself integrated, grow a little, everything, get familiar with each other before we make them really do anything. And then we'll be back to knead. Hey, so great. I got my dough mixed up. Like I said, this is just the flour, yeast, in this case sourdough starter, and water. We don't add the salt yet, it needs to rest. But here it is. It looks pretty rough, and you can see it's pretty loose and sticky. That's normal, that's fine. You want that. You'll notice over here, this is a little cup of water. Just if you mix with one hand and leave your other hand clean, then you can dip your clean hand in the water to help wipe all the gunk off of your other hand. It really helps. You also probably saw the salt sitting there. It's just waiting. It's going to wait for half an hour and while we cover this. And to cover my bowl, I use my handy dandy shower cap. They're cheap, they're easy, they're reusable, and I don't have to fight with cling stuff that always wants to stick to itself, not to what I put it on. So, Oh, I should tell you, the recipe that I am using this from is hardly a recipe. It's out of James Morton's Super Sourdough. It's awesome. This is actually so far my favorite sourdough bread recipe, but it has no name. It has no name. In the book, it's just how to make bread. There's a concise and a detailed version, which are both awesome. By the way, this is a fantastic book. But that right now has just been my go-to sourdough bread recipe. It's out of James Morton's book. I found it while I was on vacation over Christmas, and I'm working my way through it. I haven't got actually much far past this recipe because I like it so much that I just keep making it. But we're going to put our bread to rest half an hour, just relax, let the sourdough starter do its thing, kind of get itself integrated, grow a little, everything, get familiar with each other before we make them really do anything. And then we'll be back to knead. All right, our dough has had its half hour to rest and relax. Everybody get to know each other. So now it's time to pull it out of its bowl, add the salt and knead. And we're going to be kneading this for about 10 minutes. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you watch all of it. But let's get started. So you can see it hasn't changed much. Nothing really has altered or changed in there. But before we turn it out even, we're going to just sprinkle the salt over the top. And then clean hands. Make sure every time, in between while you're baking things, every time you come back to it, wash your hands. But clean hands, we're just going to stab that salt in to help it get started getting worked into this dough. And then we're going to just kind of dig it off the sides because it's going to be a little stuck. Don't worry about that. And so you just pull it off, and you're going to leave some scraps. That's fine. There's always going to be scraps. I used to be very precious about my bread. That, I didn't want to lose anything, especially, and I was that way with my sourdough starter. I didn't want to throw it away ever. I didn't want to discard the discard ever. 3 years in, I'm fine. I'm fine discarding. So a tip, actually from watching Paul Hollywood, that you don't want to add more flour into your bread at this stage. Messes with the chemistry. So instead of flouring your board, you oil it. And the oil is also going to help your bread last a little longer before it gets stale. But you just do that nice slick of oil, which also oils your hands, which is a good thing. And finish digging this bread out. And just plop it under your oil. I said not get precious, then here I am digging the last bit out. You're never going to get all of it. Don't worry about it. But if you got big clumps, dig those out. And then you want to just stretch it out. And the current way that's working best for me, I've kneaded multiple ways. This has been a growing process. Is that you stretch it out and then you roll it back in towards yourself. And give it a bit of a turn, stretch it out again, and just keep doing that. And it's going to be really stiff. You can see where it doesn't want to do this. That's your initial dough, and that's normal. Because it just hasn't relaxed yet. You get to be your bread's chiropractor. You're just helping it, masseuse. Just work all this out. And just release all that tension. And you will feel it as you knead. Like I said, I'm going to be kneading this for at least 10 minutes. But as you knead, you'll feel it soften up and relax and just let go. It will also, rather than being kind of wet and sticky, and your bread will be varying levels of wet and sticky, it will start to come together as one cohesive loaf, and it won't be sticky anymore. It'll just be kind of pliable and soft, and it'll take a while, but you'll get the feel for it. You'll get the feel for what your bread should feel like when it's fully kneaded. And you can get rough with it. Like I said, when I first started, I was too precious about my bread. I didn't want to hurt it. I didn't know. But you can be really violent with it if you want to. You'll see on baking shows sometimes that they'll do that, pick up and then slap down. That works. Whatever you want to do works. I mean, that might not work if you have a rickety table or don't want to wake up someone who's still sleeping. Maybe you're making this in the morning. But really, however you want to knead is great. Just knead. Because all you're doing is making those connections, getting that gluten activated so that your bread has the strength that it needs to be really nice and rise well. Something else you can do, pick it up, slap, pull it out, fold it over. However you want to do it, you're just making it move and work and build those connections. And you'll notice it has gotten stickier from when I first started. That is normal. Again, when I first started baking, I was horrified. I didn't realize that bread did that. I thought it should end where it started, or better. I didn't realize that it would get worse along the way. But that's just as you get things moving and started working, you're changing the relationship of the things in your bread to each other. And they haven't formed together yet. They haven't got clumpies. Like if I was to bake this right now, it would be flat and ugly and would have no structure inside. You know, with sourdough, you should get those nice bubbles. You wouldn't have anything of that at all. It would just be bleh. I mean, it would, if you're not really picky, it would be an acceptable loaf. It would be bread. I mean, you've already got all the ingredients in there, so it's not like what would come out would be horrific. But you probably wouldn't want to show it off to anybody. But don't be afraid by this sticky stage. It's normal. If you don't believe me, watch any of the competition baking shows that show you the process. You'll see the bakers all fighting through this sticky stage. And you'll see, and they'll talk about when it starts to come together, when it starts to really start working for them. So this is a normal stage in bread. Don't be afraid of it. It can get frustrating, especially if you don't like, gross hands, because you're going to get them. For some people, prefer to do this initial stuff in a stand mixer if you have one, and that's just fine. I would say, though, don't finish in a stand mixer. You can definitely get started there. Let it do most of the work, especially if you don't want to knead for 10 minutes. A stand mixer will go faster than you do by a long ways. And you don't have to put in the work and effort to get this done. And if you heard that, my cat isn't hyper. But I like getting my hands on it. I can feel as the consistency of my bread changes. So I like kneading by hand. But go ahead if you want to use your stand mixer to do most of this work. But once you think it's just about there, which this is not, pull it out and knead it by hand. Finish it by hand. Because you need to feel how your bread is. And you will get the sense whether it's finished or not from really kneading and getting your hands on it, which you can't get from watching it in a stand mixer. That doesn't tell you anything. You need to have your hands on it and feel how it behaves and how its tension is. Is it relaxed? Is it loose? Does it still feel really tight and bound up? And so you need to finish with your hands. That's all I'm saying. So I'm going to go ahead and keep working on this. Like I said, I'm not going to make you guys watch me for another, 8 minutes at least. And we'll come back and I'll show you what this ends up looking like. And then we'll go to the next step. Okay, our bread is kneaded and we're on to its next step, which is another rest. Bread needs to rest a lot. This bread doesn't get a rest the entire time. because it's also going to get stretch and folds, which are things you can do to help build your gluten during the rest period. And I like to do it especially with sourdough. I find that it doesn't entirely bind. I have very, very rarely, to be honest, ever gotten the window pane test to work from just kneading. Usually it also needs its rest, during which I also do stretch and folds. And then by the time it's done, then I can get it. But let me show you what we've got. We've made pretty good progress. So you can see it's much more pliable. Got a good stretch, and it's not far off. This is actually pretty darn good. That's a decent window pane test. It tears in the end, but it's pretty close. I have already pre-greased a container to have it rise in. I have this container. If you don't have to have something special. You don't have to have something dedicated. If you just clean out the bowl that you started this in, you can use that. Just put it back in there as long as it's big enough that you can let this rise. It's going to get at least double its size. And you can see now it's a lot more like Play-Doh. This is really soft and stretchy. Very good consistency stuff. One of the reasons I bake is because I love the feel of dough and the flavor of baked bread. But the whole process pleases me. So we're going to take this, pop it in here, and then I'm just going to roll it around a little, make sure we get all that greased up, and then you don't have to do this. I just press it down so that it kind of fills the corners and is flat. Especially in this container, you can see it's got measures. And then I can see how much it's rising. And this is going to be in here for 4 hours. During that time, I'm going to come and give it some stretch and folds. And I'm going to show you what those are right now so you can see. You come to your dough, however it's just resting, and you're going to take one corner and pull it away, and then fold that back over. Give it a quarter turn, take your next bit, pull that away, and fold it over the top of everything. And you do that at least 4 times, usually 4 to 6. And once that's done, that's your stretch and fold. Flip that over. You don't have to flip, but I like to flip. Give it another scoosh down and let it rest again. So it's going to get, generally I would do 2 or 3 of those, maybe 1 an hour, but the last hour at least, you want to just leave it. Don't touch it, let it be, do its own thing. So we're just going to cover that, put it someplace warm. So if your kitchen is a decent warmth, that's good. For me, actually my laundry room is one of the warmest rooms in the house. You don't want to get too hot, but you also don't want to have it in a really cold space like the garage, unless it's the middle of summer, because you don't want to slow things down too much. So this is just going to go sit someplace warm for 4 hours. Every hour or so, you're going to come give it those stretch and folds. So you're going to do that 2 or 3 times, and then the last hour or more, you don't touch it at all and just let it be. And then we'll be back. All right, so we finished our 4-hour rise with a couple of stretch and folds mixed in. This next step is short but important. This is our early shaping, our pre-shaping. So it's not the exact shape we want, but it's good. But first, let me show you where our bread has got to. So remember, she was pretty short before, gotten a little taller, maybe a lot taller. You can see nice and puffy, well risen, has some bounce to her. And we're going to turn this out gently. We don't want to knock too much of the air out. And you can see the oil is kind of pooled in there. And hopefully, there she goes. And that most all slides out pretty clean. So our next step is going to divide this in half. And you could use a knife. I have a bit scraper. I really, really, really like this tool. So we're just going to cut this in half. And then, like I said, shaping should be fairly gentle. You don't want to squish too much of this air out. But we also need to build up surface tension, which is what's going to help your bread rise and get a nice crust on it. So we're going to fold like an envelope, then give it a turn, give it a little stretch, and do that fold again. And for this first shaping, that's all we're going to do. And then set this aside. And do the same thing. Stretch it out a little. Fold over about 2/3. Fold the other third over. Give it a turn. Stretch again. Fold. Fold. And there we go. Now these two are going to sit for half an hour. We get this a lot. And just rest again. This was a lot of activity. They just came out of their nice restful containers and now they're getting stretched and pulled. They need another rest. So we're going to cover these. I just use a tea towel and let them rest for a while, and then we'll be back to do the final shaping.
2,000 years later.
Our rest is done. So they've had their nice bench rest and relax. Time to do our final shaping and get them into, I have bannetons. You can also use Easter baskets or bowls with a tea towel put in, all kinds of things. I'll show you when we get there. But first, let's get to our final shaping. Ta-da! So nice, rested, relaxed. You can see bubbles. Odds are we won't be able to keep these. But what you can see is just a hint. There's going to be better stuff inside. So we're going to start off moving this guy off to the side, nice and gentle, so we can get the shaping done on this one. We're going to flip him over. And just like we did for the initial rise, we're going to gently separate them out. Fold, fold, and again, fold, fold after a twist. Now we built up more tension. And now we need to build up even more. You're going to tuck your hands kind of underneath and kind of pull and twist. You need to have friction against the board. If your board is too slippery, wipe it down, because it's going to be doing a lot of the tension building in what we're doing right now. And you can see as you go that this gets tighter and kind of pulls tauter, and that's what you want. Not there yet because it's starting to try to want to separate down here. You want this to be sealed. And you can do a little of that on your own, just pinching it. Now, since my bannetons are oblong, that's the shape that I need this to go into. So to get that, I'm just going to gently kind of rock it back and forth, pulling in the middle. You see how that, just that little bit, stretched its shape out. Now if we turn it over, this is pretty well sealed underneath. So we're going to take that and just lay it nice and gentle in our banneton. And then we do the same with the other one. Stretch and fold, rotate, stretch just a little. You don't want to pull too hard, you'll pop out all the bubbles. And pull that over, and then we shape. And I like to start shaping in the round. I think I get the best tension that way. And then I move it into the oblong. But whatever works for you, all you want to do is build up this surface tension and close up underneath. And you will notice my dough's still a little sticky. That's okay. If you normally just make, I guess you could say regular bread, sourdough is always going to be stickier. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. That's the way it is supposed to be. So if you try to make sourdough and you hadn't made it before, and you get frustrated because it never feels like the bread that you normally make, it's never going to. It's not supposed to. So that goes into the banneton. And I have already floured these with a rice flour because it doesn't build up gluten, so it doesn't stick to everything. And now these get covered, and they're going to rest for another couple hours until they start to rise up and they pass the poke test. When you can poke your finger, generally wet finger, in, and it only bounces back about halfway. So right now, they need to take a nice nap for a couple hours. All right, they are out and they are beautiful. Look at these. This was supposed to be a star. It kind of didn't split that way. This one was just a single cut down the middle. I didn't get a good enough angle to get a good ear on it. But there's some. It's decent. But, I mean, they've got great height. These are nice and fluffy and gorgeous. And I can't cut them yet because they're still really warm. And you don't want to cut warm bread because it's not done cooking, basically. It'll be gooey inside if you cut it this early. But those are going to be great in the morning. Well, thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed watching me bake.